speaking with Kaili Lambe, who's a senior US campaign manager for Mozilla. Today's a really big day. They've launched a really important campaign about accountability on social media. So we're really grateful to have you. If you just wanted to start by telling us about the campaign, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for inviting me here today, Kyle. Excited to chat with y'all about the work that we're doing in the lead up to the US elections around election-related misinformation on many of the platforms. And today we just launched a campaign, an open letter in the Washington Post calling on Facebook and Twitter to pause key algorithmic recommendation engines. So in the case of Twitter, the trend feature, and in the case of Facebook, the group recommendation feature.
Can you tell us a bit more about what each of those do for like lay people engaging with tech?
Yeah, well, so when you go on Twitter, oftentimes you'll see what's trending, and that is, keywords, key hashtags that often can be taken out of context. So, for example, here there's one that's trending in the United States. It was 93% of Black Lives Matter, which is like taken completely out of context. A similar one to that that is not on the screen, but it was around misinformation around COVID. It was 6%. 6% was trending, and it was lifting up the idea that only 6% of COVID deaths were actually COVID deaths. A couple other ones here: Trump 2020 landslide, which I tweeted that and asked, like, what would happen if that were trending on election night? What would Twitter do about that? So this is just one way that trends can kind of lift up misinfo. And in the case of the 6% one, we saw that go from Twitter to other platforms that was showing up on Instagram and TikTok. So when something starts to get that virality on Twitter through trends and through that algorithmic recommendation, it can take off on its own and really lift up that misinformation that people might not have seen if not for the trends.
And so does it give that? So yeah, just quickly on the Twitter. So in terms of like why it's misinformation, is it sort of this combination of, one, it's a bubble on Twitter of people driving something, and calling it a trend gives people a perception of it that maybe isn't accurate? Or is it that it ripples to other places? What's really like driving the harm here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's a couple different ways that it does show up. So in the case of that one that you just showed the screenshot of, the 2020 Trump landslide, that was something that I'm guessing, Trump supporters were trying to get it to go trending. I think that was on the town hall night last week. So when something like that is trending, people might take it to be real. Like, it might suppress people's votes in thinking like, either I don't have to vote because this is going to happen, or this is happening. And so that's the concern there is without the context. And Twitter has said that they will be adding context to trends, but there was one that was showing up without that context. So if voters aren't seeing that context, what impact does that have on them is the question. And in the case of the 6% piece, that was something taken completely out of context from a Health and Human Services report. And without the context around what that meant, people started to believe that COVID perhaps wasn't as deadly as it could be, and that could lead to risky behavior in terms of people potentially exposing themselves because they think it's not as bad as it could be.
So sometimes it's a matter of life and death, actually. Potentially, if you're with really harmful content. All right, now tell me about Facebook. I know you have a screen share as well. I'd love to see what you're putting out as you tell us about the Facebook side of this too.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me get that up. Great. Are you seeing our homepage here?
Yes, we are.
Great. Yeah, so we just launched this letter today. Here's what it looks like in the Washington Post. It was co-signed by 6,000 internet users who agree with the ask to Facebook and Twitter on these key recommendation engines. And I'm just gonna leave it right here on these quotes. I think one of the things for us that really stood out as we were exploring, these platforms have had 4 years to try to find solutions to some of the problems we saw in 2016. And they've really struggled to keep up with it, even after many of the lessons that we have learned in those past 4 years. And now we're 2 weeks out from the next election. And while they have taken numerous steps, this one seemed like a very key thing for them to do. In fact, as early as 2016, Facebook knew that its Facebook group recommendation engines were driving growth to groups, largely, that was where growth in groups was coming from. And so this quote here, 64% of all extremist groups joined are due to Facebook's recommendation tools. That came from a report that Facebook had back in 2016. So they've known for 4 years that this is a problem. And, in the case.
And we're, oh, sorry, I was gonna say, we're only 2 weeks away. They've known this is a problem. They've done nothing about it. The trends we're seeing with the way groups and events are being used on Facebook to, potentially target people in the election using coded language, poll watchers. This is potentially a huge, huge risk to this election.
It could be for sure. And I mean, both Facebook's own engineers as well as Twitter employees have raised concerns about these two features. And so it seems that particularly given, Facebook in recent weeks had banned health groups, in part because the spread of COVID misinformation was just too rampant for them to keep up with. And so given that we're 2 weeks out from a major US election and that there could be confusion in the weeks after the election, in particular with so many votes coming in through mail and other potential outcomes that make this election unique, it's really important that we're not feeding that misinformation that could, both confuse people and lead to potential violence or other, outcomes that could be detrimental to democracy or society.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you want to, just before we stop the screen share and chat a bit more, did you want to show the tracker tool?
Sure.
Yeah, this is super interesting.
Yeah, so last week we put out this platform tracker, which you can find on our website. And we can also share the link, I believe. It took a lot of research, and I think the key thing to know is that it's a living document. That's why it's a Google Doc, because this is changing pretty much daily. So we had key criteria around disinformation, and you can see we tracked 6 platforms. So Facebook, Instagram, Google Search, YouTube, Twitter, and TikTok. And we dug in on over 20 pieces of criteria for each of the 6, looking at if they have a policy around false claims of victory on election night, for example. And it was very interesting to see how each platform was taking both similar and different approaches here. One thing that we noticed was that each platform of the 6 had policy updates in the past few weeks, in the time that we were doing the research. And so as the election is nearing, it's almost impossible to keep up with the new policy changes. And that really points to the need for uniform across the board regulation so that we can have consistency across platforms and how they approach mis and disinformation.
Yeah, there's some real frightening ones on there, isn't there? Does election misinformation content result in removal of content, deleted accounts? Facebook, no. Instagram, no. Do rules of labeling, removing, or deleting apply to elected officials? Facebook, partial. Instagram, no. I mean, we're talking about the digital public sphere. We're talking about the place people go online to engage in elections and democracy, and isn't even a straightforward policy with some of these for what happens when the content is totally misleading or sending people in the wrong direction. So where is this? So people can go online and view this, and you say it's a Google Doc because it's live. Does that mean it's being updated or and evolving? Yeah.
It is, yeah. We will be updating it as new information arises, as platforms change their policies. And you can find all of this on our website, foundation.mozilla.org. We have this elections hub here that it actually shares the link to that tracker, as well as some of the other work that we've done. And one other piece that I will point to, I think it comes back to transparency in a lot of ways, and transparency as a mechanism for us to understand what the threat is and recommend solutions. So, I think one example I saw that you had shared on Twitter in recent days, the story about Facebook removing 2.2 million ads, and kind of with a question of, if you say that this happened, what can you tell us about it? And the reality is that we don't know how many ads might be missing, or how those content moderation decisions were made. And this really is a factor of transparency. And I think one thing that we're seeing there as well is that it's not just these big social media platforms where people may be expecting that there would be a lack of transparency, but it's also on platforms that people might not see as the internet, so to speak. So another piece of research that we put out recently was around streaming television, and Hulu and other streaming platforms where you might be watching your favorite television show and you're seeing political ads. And maybe a lot of Americans think that it's just like television. You're watching, your favorite show on your favorite channel. And in fact, you can be targeted specifically with a political ad on that show that you're watching, you with personal data of yours that your neighbor would never see. And so it's not in any way like broadcast television. And so people don't necessarily see that streaming services are an extension of the internet, that they're using personal data to target you. And there's very little transparency from those platforms about how they handle political ads and what is allowed and how they allow targeting.
Yeah, so it really sounds like it's a similar effect, potentially the emotional effect of mixing up cat videos, announcements about your siblings, new baby, politics. This is like potentially your favorite show, politics, more of your favorite show. And that emotional roller coaster can really affect the way people experience it, as well as you say, it's a completely personal experience. I wanted to ask you just two more questions, and then I want to shout out the campaign again before we finish. But in terms of, we were talking about like in the risks posed in the run-up to the election. Your calls are aimed at until the election results are certified. That's sort of the benchmark. What made you decide on that as the benchmark?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as I mentioned, I think that there's a good likelihood that we will see misinformation and disinformation take root both on election night and in the weeks that follow. Just as an example, that Twitter trend of Trump's landslide, what would Twitter do? Or like, what if some, either the Biden campaign or someone affiliated with Biden, like similarly got something like that trending? Like, how would Twitter approach that? And if that sort of information were taking off in Facebook groups, what would that lead to? And so that's why it felt so important that it be something that is through election results being certified, so that we can really protect democracy and ensure that the democratic process is able to play out how it's supposed to play out without that interference from the platforms and from malicious behavior on those platforms.
Because it's one of those unique characteristics of American democracy. It's not actually done until the election rules are certified, the electoral college is met. This is a much longer process than perhaps a lot of people who didn't grow up in the system are aware of. And then my last question before we just shout the campaign out again is, I think a lot of people might know Mozilla as the parent company of Firefox, the browser. Of course, there's much more to it, but why doesn't Mozilla care about this? Like, why is there an effort, a campaign around responsible internet, responsible platforms from an internet tech company? It seems sort of, for a lot of people, probably like, this isn't what tech does.
Yeah, well, I'll also give a quick shout out to my Zoom background here, which, if you've been appreciating it, it's part of Mozilla's campaign, which I'll give a content warning. It has a swear word in it, but it's, the Unfuck the Internet campaign. And, Mozilla, since our founding, has been about supporting a healthy and open web. And where there are threats to that internet that we love, we're gonna call that out and push it back and hold companies to account so that we can continue to have a healthy and open internet. So this campaign that Mozilla Corporation, which makes a product that you might be familiar with, the Firefox browser, it has been pushing ways that we can take action for the internet and push back on some of that harmful behavior and the patterns that have started to threaten the future of the internet. So at Mozilla, we're sorry, I'll just say real quick, we're actually a nonprofit. I work for Mozilla Foundation, and we're a mission-driven organization. And the browser itself is, it's not a for-profit product, right? So we can live those values of privacy, of building an open and healthy web, and be driven by that mission rather than for-profit.
So not all tech has to be the way it is. There are examples of good tech, better tech. Great. Well, if you can just finish by telling us one more time the 2 campaign asks and what people can do, and then we're going to share that information as well in the live streams and in the live tweets, so people can just jump right on it.
Yeah, absolutely. If it's okay, I'll share my screen one more time just so you can see that all in one place.
See them.
So let me get that up. Oh, that might be that. Hold on. I just want to share the 2 actions that you can take for this campaign in particular. Are you seeing the election track, the policies tracker here?
Yep, platform
Great.
Policies tracker, yeah.
So you can check this out. It's all on that website that I pointed to before. And then if you want to take action, you can go to this elections hub here, which that also links to the tracker. And there's a few things you can do. You can sign a petition to Facebook to stop group recommendations. And you can sign a petition to Twitter to untrend. And both of those are also hashtags if you want to tweet about it. And then lastly, you can also sign your name to the letter that we just published today. So as I mentioned, more than 6,000 people have signed this letter. And you can also sign the letter here on our website. So you can read it and learn more and then add your name.
Great. Well, we'll make sure that is put out so everybody can see it in line. And I think it's right now, right? We want people to hashtag untrend Twitter so we can get untrend Twitter trending. Say that 5 times fast.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, awesome.
Using Twitter to call out some of, and I think Twitter in particular has taken steps in the right direction, and it's important for them to know that we see that, but at the same time, this is an important step for them to take. And so actually, my colleagues at Mozilla have launched also a campaign on Twitter, specifically calling on Jack Dorsey to take action on this untrend Twitter ask.
At Jack, hashtag untrend Twitter. Get on it, people. All right, Kaili, thanks so much for being with us. It was really, really useful, informative, and good luck with the rest of today and the ongoing campaign.
Thank you so much, Kyle. It's been great chatting with you, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing.
Likewise.